Welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere, where CEOs, leaders, and experts at building teams,
companies,
organizations,
and amazing cultures share how to lead from anywhere in the world. I'm your co-host on the East Coast, Ginny Bianco Mathis.
And I'm your co-host on the West Coast, Mitch Simon. And we invite you to join us to Team Anywhere. Today, we interview Yamini Naidu, economist turned master business storyteller. The new hybrid and virtual workplace will be new, challenging, and definitely a more emotional game. The greatest leaders and managers will engage their workforce through connecting the new future, the new culture, and the new way that we will form relationships through masterful storytelling. This is an essential podcast as every leader, now further away from their employees, will use storytelling to bring their employees together. Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Team Anywhere. I'm Mitch Simon, your co-host on the West Coast, and we've got Ginny Bianca Mathis on the East Coast. In the studio today, we're so excited to have on the podcast Yamini Naidu, leadership expert, best-selling author, and perhaps the world's foremost authority on business storytelling. Now, I've had a connection with Yamini because over a decade ago, I looked to her work to design a course for a national laboratory in the United States. And this team of PhDs just nailed their presentation in front of the Department of Energy. So everything that you teach works.
Wonderful.
So Yamini, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Mitch and Ginny. I'm really happy to be here, really excited to be here.
Could you tell us, this is a question we always start off with, just tell us, how has your last year been?
I think it's been a roller coaster. All over the world, it's been a roller coaster. I'm reminded of one of the last concerts the Motley Crue did in the Staples Center in LA. Tommy Lee, the drummer, he had his drum kit rigged up on a roller coaster track. So he was playing and the roller coaster was looping around stage, phenomenal. And then suddenly it reached its midpoint and it got stuck. So he was suspended midair. And I feel that's what happened. Can you imagine being suspended midair upside down? I think that's what happened to all of us last year.
Fabulous analogy.
Yeah. But Tommy Lee was such a professional. He kept on playing. Can you believe it? Because he wanted to give the fans what they came for. And luckily they got him down safely. But so I think that sort of would, for all of us. Professionally, Mitch and Ginny, I was in one sense I feel grateful that March of last year, just before, the whole world locked down, we were all at the Professional Speakers Convention, Professional Speakers of Australia. We have a convention every year. And it was the last gig we've done with 150 people. It just seems so mind-boggling. At the convention, that's been the early, I feel sometimes speakers, event industry, entertainment, we're all the canaries in the mine. All our phones started pinging with cancellation, reschedule. And the speakers who were, presenting across those 3 days were so phenomenal. They immediately regrouped and started addressing the pandemic even before it started to unfold. And in that sense, that sort of, we had a support group. We had some level, I set up a virtual studio. So much came out of that. But personally, it's also, been really up and down. Melbourne, we had the extended 111. And we had a really extended, hard lockdown. But and the very first day when masks were mandatory and I stepped out, you could cut the atmosphere with a knife. There was just this on the whole depressed. We're all just felt very post-apocalyptic. But luckily we've all sort of Melbourne, we've come out of that, and fingers crossed for every country around the world. But it's also made us re-examine some of our values, our fundamental systems, perhaps around equity, around caring for the environment, caring for each other across the globe. So it does matter what the healthcare that a simple peasant living, somewhere distant from us gets. So I think it's also such an opportunity for us not to go back fully. And I think Barry does this so well in his Future of Work PDF in your previous podcast. I wouldn't want to go back to exactly everything we had before.
What I love about the way you express is you express so visually. Like I can see the roller coaster, and I could just start to see the images of you at the conference, and so it's obvious you are a master storyteller, and
Yes.
and I want to know, tell us like why you're so passionate about storytelling. Why did you dedicate your life and your books and your reading and your presentations to storytelling, and why in the business world?
I know. Oh, Mitch. Dad, please don't stop the interview here, and please don't stop listening to our podcast listeners, our audience. I'm actually an economist by training.
Shh.
We'll edit that out. But as an economist and as a senior leader in corporate Australia, I was always frustrated by how come data doesn't work. Like I had case studies, I had stacks of PowerPoint slide decks, I had return on investment, and we still couldn't connect, engage, and inspire people. We couldn't get that shift in behavior. And on a long haul flight, someone gave me a book, and the Leader's Guide to Storytelling. And even seeing the word leader, which meant business, and storytelling was like my brain got fried. It was such an oxymoron. It was one of the first books written by Stephen Denning. And I was so desperate for answers because you get so frustrated and stuck as a leader because you're pushing so hard, you're doing, everything you can. I devoured the book on this long haul flight. And as soon as I got off, I rang a few leaders I knew. And they all said two things. They said, we know good leaders tell stories, but we don't know how to. And I was totally bewitched. And I started Googling. There wasn't much. There was just that HBR article by Stephen Denning and the one book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the best way to learn something is to teach it. So that's when, yeah, I thought there was an opportunity where I could serve my business audience because that's my background. I've got a corporate background, but give them the skill that would help them get the results after, the hard work that they've been pushing in. So that's how I got into storytelling. It's been 15 years. I can't believe it. I know when we started, people would go, business storytelling. How can you even storytell in business? And there were all these objections. And now I think we've come to the wonderful journey has been now how can you not storytell in business?
Exactly. I think
That's I tell my clients these days, if you go to the bookstore, if you can find one, on the bookshelves are your books and other books on leader as storyteller.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us, what's the difference, if there is one? What's the difference between storytelling and what you spend a lot of your time on, which is business storytelling?
Always, I think of them as a continuum. So, like storytelling, personal storytelling is what you might do in the pub, in the pub. Is that a universal word? It's very Australian, with friends and family. Business storytelling is like it's similar. It's across the storytelling spectrum. But what makes it different is in business, you always have to have a purpose. You have to have a message. Uh, I have to know your audience, and your stories have to be true. Okay, that's really important. I know. In our personal life, we can make up stuff, and our friends often challenge us. They go, "Is that a true story?" So, I'll just give you an example. So where it's quite different. I did some work with Bernadette Iskander, and she was leading a team in an insurance company in Australia. And insurance is very like matter of fact, very black and white. You punch. You're very efficient. You punch through stuff. But she wanted her team to sometimes take a step back and pause. So sometimes we've got to give the customers a second chance. Now you can just say that as words and they are just like Teflon, non-stick. Nothing, won't stick. So she decided to share this story. So she said, a few weeks ago, my little 5-year-old niece Maya came tearing into the house holding an apple in each hand. And I thought, this is a good time. I'm going to teach Maya how to share. And I said, Maya, can I please have one of your apples? She quickly took a bite out of the apple in her right hand, and quick as a flash, she took a bite out of the apple in her left hand. I was shocked. But before I could say anything, she reached out with the apple in her left hand, and she said, Auntie, have this one. It's sweeter.
Oh,
I'm
Oh,
sharing
gosh.
this with you because every
We,
day,
of course, will remember that story, right?
right. And then she has a little tag, which is where, you try to end on purpose. So she goes, I'm sharing this with you because every day we have that same opportunity. With our customers, we can jump to conclusions. But every time we give our customers a second chance, imagine the difference we can make. So that just literally
Inspiring.
your reaction, everyone in the room was, well, the most powerful thing you can do in business storytelling. So this is again that, almost like a paradox, is to use personal stories to land a business message.
hmm.
Yeah, we're over like boring business stories, they just talk about the business and what we do, and we're just over that. We really want to see, even if it's a large corporation, definitely if you're an entrepreneur who work for yourself, if you're a startup across the board. So that's sort of where the power nests.
I love that story.
Yes, isn't it
Beautiful, isn't
wonderful?
it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
So
touched
I'm,
everybody in the room. They could
yeah,
immediately see how, and it made a
yeah, and
difference
you,
for a team. Yeah.
It's the
you,
emotional response, right? That's what
Correct.
you're trying to get.
Correct.
Yeah.
so why is, I'm going to go out there. Why is business storytelling more important than ever, especially now?
I think, when we talk about a meta modern world, I think storytelling is that silken thread that just weaves all its way. It'll help us reach this meta modern world, and it'll also help us stay connected with each other. Just in our present, I think, Barry was talking about this as well. It's about designing a human experience. So finding the heart in our organization. Much more important now. We're all looking for authenticity. We're looking for provenance. We're looking for personal connection. We've all felt really grounded in community. We've started to value these things in a way that perhaps they haven't been valued before. And for me, I just think data, and we know this data is, can I swear? Data can
You,
be
if you're from Australia or from
boring.
Dublin, you can swear.
That's right.
It's just data can be really boring. I know. I'm a very amateur, very modest, non-swearer kind of person. So yeah, it can be just really boring. Just data is really hard for your audience to understand, remember, retell. Those are our three challenges. We're always trying to get people to understand what we're saying. Whether you're dealing in product, you're dealing in a service, you're dealing with your teams, you're talking to stakeholders, you're pitching your work. People have to remember it. And stories are the Velcro on people's brains. Nothing else will stick. And finally, they've got to retell it. So if they come out
Yeah.
of a meeting or they're talking to their partner at home and they say, what was that huge strategy meeting about? They've got nothing, you know. But if they
Right.
have a story, they have something. And my final thing was, I think we live in a world that's just bloated with information. Bloated. But there's an inspiration famine. And traditionally, we've used to influence. So storytelling is like the contemporary tool for influence. We've used hard power, which is command and control, yell and tell. Mitch, um, if you ever had a boss pull rank on you, you've shouted at your kids, clean up your room, you've experienced hard power.
Yeah.
We then in the 90s discovered soft power through the work of Professor Joseph Ney of Harvard. Soft power is about connecting, consulting, collaborating. And then we have story power. So hard power informs, soft power invites, but story power inspires. So
Yes.
you definitely need both soft power and story power. Very occasionally hard power, like if it's an emergency, people have to follow process, stuff is urgent. Very, very sparingly. Like, most of the time we want to live in a world with soft power, where we're connecting, consulting, collaborating. And then to have that other layer, to really lift your game, to quantum leap your influence, you've got to have story power.
Share with me. Um, I dealt with this. How would you deal with this? I had a CEO and I wanted him to start using storytelling just from the energy that he had about what he wanted to do in the organization. And when I recommended it, he said, "Well, I don't tell stories."
we
And the second thing he said is, "And I have no stories to tell." So I dealt with it. How would
I
you deal
don't
with
tell
it?
stories. I have to write this down. It's powerful stuff. It's worth a blog. So thank you, Ginny.
Yes.
I
Blog ideas from Team
know. I
Anywhere.
don't tell stories, and yeah, I have no stories. Okay. Um, this is when that careful definition of business storytelling is really important. It's helped a lot of my clients because they think otherwise storytelling is like long-winded war stories, all of that. Business storytelling is not. I would never be binary, so they always worry that we're saying abandon everything, just tell stories. Like even I don't do that. So I would always say, in addition to the data, can you share some stories? And if the word stories is not landing, I would say, can you share some personal or business experiences? So always start off with a wide palette. I would say never coince is the French word, never corner people with the word because something about storytelling, people think it has to be epic because we've grown up, Ginny, in this, perhaps you've grown up with watching motivational speakers. And they
Sure.
always are like, abseiling down Mount Everest, sailing around the world, doing all of this. And you think, oh my God, I've got nothing. I've got nothing like that.
Yes, good point.
Yeah. And what frees us is to know that personal stories, like the child with the apple, is what is highly relatable. So these epic stories put your audience in a watching a performance mode. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm like amazed. But the personal stories puts the audience in the story with you.
Yes.
So that would help him. So don't even just talk about, can you share how can we make this come alive? Can you share? So if he's saying I don't do stories, I would say, okay, in addition to the data, we're definitely doing the data. What is an example you can share? What's a
Yeah.
business experience you can share? What's a personal experience? So I'm scaling up the degree of difficulty. Yeah. And even an analogy can be put in that. What's an analogy? What's an example? What's a business experience? And I do personal experience last. That's hardest to do. The other thing, I have no stories. My God, we all bump up against this. Mitch, I don't know if this is appropriate. I've got a PDF that I can provide, which is
That'd
101
be
story ideas.
okay.
So
We would
Yes,
love to share
yes.
that. Yes.
yeah, and you just as soon as you start to read all of those, you go, my God, I've got a story. Like even if you went through all the firsts in your life, my first day of school, my first date, my first marriage proposal, my first child, my first
Yeah.
job. Can you see how that's like a Russian dolls? Even if you went, what are the firsts in my life? And you start to build all your stories, you'll never run out. Yeah, you'll never run out. So I'll definitely share
Totally.
that 101 story ideas.
That's
And also,
nice.
yeah, level of skill. It's just a different way about thinking about the world. So once you start to spot stories, you start to spot them everywhere.
Yeah,
Is
and they
there?
start collecting them.
You've
Yeah.
got to
You collect
record
them. You
and
got to write
collect
them
them.
down.
Very important because I do that in two ways. It's a really important point, Ginny. But just coming back to being able to see stories, like once you start, it's like you open your third eye. You go, oh my God, like every meeting is a story. I have a story in every meeting, every encounter with my barista, or even my little dog is in the room, is like, could be a story. Ginny, you were saying how we should capture our stories, we should record our stories. That's really important. You've either got to do it, I do it in two ways. So I've got like, I do analog, but I also got Evernote or OneNote. So whenever I see something in the media, something happens, I capture it because if you don't record, you're going to forget. Yeah, yeah. Um, a few years ago, I was invited in by Accenture in Melbourne, and we took all their consultants through storytelling training because every time they go up and they're shortlisted for a pitch, they wanted that to be a differentiator. 6 months after we did the work with Accenture, Jack Percy, who was then the MD of Accenture, he featured in, sorry, there's going to be lots of name dropping coming, alert, alert, alert. I know. He featured with me in Boss magazine, which is Financial Review Boss magazine, with three of my clients, Ericsson, NAB, and Accenture. And Jack Percy is quoted in the article as saying, storytelling doubled our revenue. Storytelling doubled our revenue. That's when you just want to fall to the ground in gratitude. So
Yes.
thank you so much for just putting it in black and white, putting it in this Premier magazine, not just telling me in a corridor chat, because where would be the credibility of that? So that's been, but Mitch and Ginny, like, of course, getting some skills, doing a masterclass with me or anyone who's good at it, very, very important. But what's really important is what happens after. How are they embedding the skill? And this is, for all our learning and development and for all our people who doing workshops and trading, this is our biggest challenge and our biggest frustration. In Accenture, they made a small shift. They would always, every meeting, every pitch, every proposal, every coffee shop encounter, they would ask each other, what is the story we're going to share?
Wow.
What is the story we're going to share? So, in addition to everything else we've talked about, the data, the PowerPoint slides, the business results, what is the story? So, that simple behavioral change
They made
created
it
that.
part of their culture.
Correct, correct.
That's our language, is storytelling.
Yeah, but perfect. Very good. That's spot on, spot on. So, you're thinking about it all the time and becomes who you are.
Right.
It's also, Ginny and Mitch, it also takes huge permission from the top. So the CEO and that C-suite, if you're trying to, embed anything in, as you know, particularly with
Yes.
storytelling, the teams have to see that in action with their leaders, and it has to be role model, and that's how you culturally give people permission, especially if you're trying to shift that mindset of I don't tell stories, I don't have any stories. They've got to see it done repeatedly, done well. And I'd always suggest don't throw people in the deep end and just say, let's start sharing stories. We had a new GM join in one of my organizations a long time ago. And as soon as he'd go into the lift with someone, he'd say, so what's your story? And the
Oh,
person would just like freeze, like a deer in headlights. So we never want to do that to people and say, oh, just find stories. It's so natural. It's so not. Because our business brain
yes.
is like,
You don't want to make it trivial.
yeah, we worry about so many. Sorry, Jenny, we don't want to make
No,
it trivial.
you want to raise it up. I mean, it is an art form.
Yeah, you don't want to make it trivial. Spot on. Thank you for recognizing it's a craft and an art form. Yeah.
What are like the keys to craft an engaging story? So if I am a listener here and something happened, or my first date or my first job, or how would I craft it such that people would resonate? Like the Apple story
Yeah.
is, I'm sure if you told the Apple story backwards, it would be like, what? Who cares? But like, how do you craft it? How do you craft it so that it's engaging?
Yeah, so true, so true. What happens behind the scenes before you even start to craft your story is to always begin with the end in mind, to quote Dr. Stephen Covey. What's the purpose? What's the message of the story? And then think about your audience. Who is the story going to serve? So it always really grounds us as storytellers when you go, will my story serve this room? So it really grounds us. Then I'd say that there's a craft. And so you've got an idea in your head. You're thinking, my first date or whatever. I would say three things help you. The first is understanding sequence. So not the shiny stuff, but actual sequence, beginning, middle, end.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's just that simple structure. You'd be surprised how many people think, oh wow, beginning, middle, end. Like we never thought. And you've got to really break it down. You've got to do some work on your beginning so you hook people in. Middles can be like the valley of death for a story. So you've got to make sure you continue to engage your audience. And of course, the end is both the resolution, and in business storytelling, you then do a very subtle, elegant landing on message. So we don't go thumping in with our message. So sequence, all of that in sequence is very layered and detailed. The second thing that really helps is being very specific with your stories. This is where I find that business people really, really struggle. Because all of business is abstract, conceptual, big picture. And the stories that we're talking about is the opposite of that. It's
Ah,
concrete, detailed, small picture. So we really struggle. It's like we've got to turn on a different part of our brain.
yes.
So we often think we're being specific. Like I might say, last year, 2 years ago, I traveled to Europe. I had a great time. It's not specific enough. But if I go in 2019, I woke up, I was traveling to Paris, and I woke up one Monday morning and I found my passport had been stolen. Can you see how that just is so specific? Like the minute I said Paris, what did your brain imagine?
Oh, I imagined being in one of those small, tiny, brightly colored hotels like outside the Louvre, and being on one of those very uncomfortable thin beds.
At the Eiffel Tower, the croissants. I love
Yes.
sensory, yeah. And so only if you're specific. So the first point was make sure you have a sequence. Second is be specific, for God's sake, like, name people, locations. And if you think of all the narratives we consume on a daily basis, on TV and cinema and media, they're very, very specific.
Yes.
And the third thing is then it's when you are specific, you do the two most powerful things in storytelling. You create emotion, you make your audience feel something, which is what you felt with the Apple story, and you paint a picture. So I call that sensory data. You paint a picture. And Mitch, you just did it when you talked about being in the small, brightly colored cafes outside the Louvre. You're painting a picture. But you can only do that if you're specific. So those
Yeah, I love
are
that.
some tips to help people get going.
Yeah, I love that. When we do improv, the more specific, the funnier it is.
So true. Even comedy is very specific,
Yes.
isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a slippery thing for people to get. Yeah. So, and the thing that challenges us is we worry about oversharing. So, Ginny, we worry when you tell a story, you're putting something of yourself out there. So you have that little bit of vulnerability. So it's really important to differentiate between a personal story, like the apples, I can share, and a private story. So even as a storyteller, I'm very careful about what I won't share.
Okay.
So I deem that as private, but I'm happy to share personal stuff, my family, my dog, where I live, where I work. So as long as we have that clarity and you decide what's private for you and, put a guardrail around it. And the rest is can be because they're so relatable. Talk about taking a bus to school or being bullied as a kid, going on your first date. These are universal human experiences. So there's so much power in them.
Definitely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast is one, because I've just been following you for so long. Another is it just so happens that we had a few months ago. You already mentioned Barry Winkless, who's the head of Future of Work Institute in Dublin. He calls himself. I went on his website. He calls himself a strategic storyteller,
Love it. Love it. And
and he's a great. What's
sorry, you
that?
go. Sorry, you go. He's great.
He's a master story. He's so engaging again.
Wonderful.
So in his paper, he states that not only will storytelling be one of the most important skill sets, if not the most important skill set for leaders of the future, but leaders will have to take their story and then turn them into an experience. And he didn't tell us how. We might have him back on the show. And I was wondering how you might work with a CEO or someone driving culture on how you might craft a story of the future of the company. Because as you've pointed out, none of us are going back, and none of us know what the future is going to look like. All of my clients we're working with is we have no idea what the future is going to look like. So how would you support a client in crafting the story and then turning that story into a living experience of the company?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful question. And Mitch, I really enjoyed. And if people haven't already downloaded that Future of Work PDF by Barry Winkless, I'd highly recommend it. So it
Thank
was
you.
really thought provoking and beautifully written, written.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was.
We talked about the difference between micro storytelling, which is the personal oral storytelling, the examples which I was sharing, which leaders should do seamlessly all through the day. Yeah. And then he's talking about macro storytelling. So macro storytelling is how do we do this across an organization? And one way then is to think larger than just individual stories or your brand promise or your employee value proposition. If you lift them all up and you think of them as a story experience. So I would just say, what if you were writing a Netflix show? What would episode 1 be? What would episode 2 be? So that's one way of thinking about it. Also, when we run events, and I think he touched on this, it's such a wonderful hat to have on to say what is the story we're crafting with this event. I don't even want to use the word event because every time we bring customers, stakeholders, our team members together, we want to create an experience. So how can we have an experiential moment? There's nothing more experiential than storytelling. So I've done work with clients where we provided a list of what I call framing questions without even, um, doing too much skilling or anything, having them in groups and circles, getting them to share their experiences. And they're all stories. So it's like little campfires, they're all stories. And then done spotlights where we can then highlight what do we need to share across the organization. But it's a wonderful way of really dropping into our bodies and saying, how is this an experience versus just like something intellectual in my head? And I think that's where the challenge, but the opportunity also lies. So that's powerful stuff. It's hard to get your head around, but that's how I'd see it. A macro story is again like a thread that weaves all the way through your organization. But what's hanging off these threads is all those little micro stories. So you don't get this boring one big fat story designed by committee. That's the death knell of any story. What all the little micro stories do is they find the human. So even when you're creating your experience, I would always say, find the human. Who is this experience for? Is it the customer? What does that, what kind of experience would they like? How can we story tell or craft something for them that would work? A long answer to.
That was great. No, I expected a long answer because it's a very difficult question. Yeah. So now I've heard you have a new book out there, Light of the
Light of the
Party.
Light of the
Light of the Party.
Light.
And tell us about your latest book. This is what, your fifth book?
My sixth book. Yeah.
Your sixth book.
Yeah, this is number 6. I'm going to hold it up.
Number 6.
It's got the most gorgeous cover. I wrote this in 2020 when we still possibly not feeling. It was called Life of the Party, L-I-F-E, and then all the party stopped. But I thought light of the party. So even with an introvert, with anybody, it can work. I'm on a quest to teach everyone in the world, whether you're a volunteer, you're a stay-at-home homemaker, you're a parent in your kid's school, a teacher, you can learn storytelling. If we're all better storytellers, I think our ability to share stories and connect with each other in a way that's profound, but simple, will really help us shift the world. I just feel a real resonance with the minute you listen to someone's story, you can't hate them anymore. So I feel in a world.
I love that.
Yeah.
You're expected to sell 7.7 billion copies then.
Yeah.
So it's a copy for everyone, right?
Yay! Finally, I can. Not that I want to, but I can do my classes from Hawaii or from the Caribbean.
Yes.
That's right.
Island. So it's actually called Be That Storyteller Who Fascinates Friends, Dazzles Dates, wows clients, wins promotions, and gets kids to make their beds.
Okay, that's important.
The last happened to one of my clients. She came to my workshop, did storytelling. She went home and told her 10-year-old a story, and he made his bed. The story influenced him to make his bed. So I hope it's got at least 2 things in there that works for everybody.
Oh, how powerful!
It's a really simple. It was the hardest book for me to write, Ginny and Mitch, because you're trying to really make something simple.
Yes.
Fun illustrations. Yes. My designer's done a great cover. He's done a very flattering little cartoon of me on the back. I don't know if you can see it.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when did you launch? When did that book come out?
It's going to come out at the end of the month, in end of April. But we can do a special code. April?
Okay, yeah. Special code would be great.
Yeah, for your audience, we can do a special code.
That would be fantastic.
So, it'll be up. You can order it through my website at the moment. It's like a pre-release. But it doesn't work out when people are overseas and stuff. It's just too hard.
Right.
So we'll be releasing it on Amazon.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's how we would get it here. Because
Yamini,
Australia has it's not close to the 7.7 billion. I think it's one of those smaller populated countries.
I could be in India, so I'll get India, America.
There you go.
India, the 3 most.
You hit 1 billion.
Yeah.
When you think of people, and I've done some storytelling, and I'm always concerned. I'm sure you are far beyond this. So you're such an expert.
No.
And I'm always surprised at how much they then want to, because I have them do a little mini story following the step. they all want to tell their story. And of course, you don't have all the time in one workshop. Taking this to our overall theme of Teams Anywhere, when you talk about a story and its energy and its humanity and painting the picture and creating a vision in people's head, you can see the power of this for leaders to cross that hybrid and virtual divide. So beautifully.
So true. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Is there something we should have asked you, Yamini, that we have not asked you?
Yeah, so I've sort of got my three, golden rules is go personal, don't hide. This is for everyone in business. Don't hide behind business stories. Yeah. Please don't do story by committee. It's the worst thing. It won't be a story. Please don't just call anything a story. Like, a story has to have all the elements we were talking about. And always find the human. That's the heart of everything. Even if
Just find
you're
the humor.
many, many layers removed, there's somebody who's using your product or your service. So, even if you worked in the most automated, AI influenced industry, you've got to find the human. That's when you'll find the heart of your story and you'll start to build.
Okay, find the human.
Find the
Right.
human, find the human. That's the heart of storytelling. Yeah.
Where can we find you? Where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, you can find me just on my website. But I tend to, and if you're looking at any social media platforms, LinkedIn is the best place to find me. And recently I've been making gentle forays into Instagram.
Yeah, we see it. We see it. We see it above you at Yamini Naidu.
Yeah.
Yamini Naidu.
Yeah.
And that is for our listeners. It's YAMININAIDU.
Brilliant. Well done. Thank you, Mitch. That was my old Twitter handle. It's a physical sign. It's made out of light wood. And my team would carry it out to events. And now it's up on my wall. So, but I'm not on Twitter anymore. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, gosh, Yamini, this has been, I've been looking forward to this so much.
This has been
beautiful,
wonderful.
beautiful session. I want to thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah.
We look forward to staying in contact and maybe bringing you back.
Yes.
And thank you, Ginny, my lovely co-host.
Just wonderful.
Great.
I don't want it to end. The word you used was wonderful. It was a beautiful podcast.
It was a beautiful podcast.
Thank you so much. Ginny and Mitch, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for connecting from, the East and the West Coast. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. And well, thank you both. And thank you to all of our incredible listeners who are growing week after week after week. We should hit 2,000 downloads with this podcast. I know we will. And we look forward. So please share this podcast with everyone you know, because 7.7 billion people will be buying Yamini's book. And we look forward.
Guaranteed, yeah.
Guaranteed.
A witness. I know it's guaranteed.
You'll buy one right now.
7 million copies, Mitch.
Yes, I'm there. So thank you. And we'll see you on next week's edition of Team Anywhere.